Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Right, okay, so after last week's rather alcohol-fueled episode of the show, I thought, let's be a little bit more strained this week. Let's do something a little less alcoholic. Yeah, no, so I'm mad, I'm completely barking. Not only have I got single cask strength bottlings, I've got 7 of them. As you can see from the title page, these are the, well, I say new. In actual fact, they were released 7 months ago, so it's not particularly new, but I've only finally got the last few samples of these single casks that were released by Angus Dundee distillers from their 2 distilleries, Glencadam and Tomintoul, and a big thank you to the distillery and to Ben, the rep from Angus Dundee, for the samples for today's episode of the show. And because there's 7, I was thinking, well, which one do I drop out? You know, it's like, I mean, so I thought, I'm just going to have to do all of them and just not waffle too much and just kind of get on with tasting them. But before I do, these are all obviously distillery releases, and it's unusual. You don't see it that often, distilleries releasing single casks, but you know, when they do, you take some notice, because I mean, you think about it, you know, these distilleries have, you know, a considerable number of casks at their disposal, and you can pretty much bet your bottom dollar they're not going to release anything shall we say, less than perfect. But of course, as they say, the devil is in the detail, or the devil is in the juice, as the case may be. So not really a great deal to say apart from let's take a look at today's lineup. Right, okay, so I'm doing these in sort of I suppose stylistical order, and I'm going to kick off with the Glencadam 14-year-old single bourbon cask, bottled at 62.1. Oh, what a start. So this is a single bourbon barrel, BB, which I'm assuming stands for bourbon barrel, 197, distilled in October of 2003 and bottled in September of 2018, as are all of the samples for today's episode. Second bottling we'll be looking at is the second of the 3 single casks from Glencadam. This was distilled in December of 1999. It was bottled at 57.7%, thus making it an 8-year-old, and like I said, single bourbon barrel, BB 3077. Then we're going to move on to the 2 bourbon barrel or bourbon cask Tomintouls. The first one is a 13-year-old. It was distilled in January of 2005, bottled again at 62.1%. Just needed to make sure because it's exactly the same ABV as the Glencadam. This was a first fill bourbon cask, and the cask number was FFB 198, which I'm assuming again stands for first fill bourbon. Oh, I'm good at this deciphering malarkey, aren't I? Anyway, the second Tomintoul again is an 18-year-old, again a first fill bourbon cask, a barrel, FFB 37. This was distilled in August of 2000 and bottled at 53.4%. 54.3% rather. God, it's a bit of a lightweight really, isn't it? Then we're going to move on to the 3 sherried casks. Now, you would have thought that all of the bourbon ones are single bourbon casks, and interestingly enough, I don't know whether it says on the back label because I haven't physically looked at the back label of one of these bottles, but the sherry bottle, the sherry matured are not wholly sherry matured. So for example, the next one is a Tomintoul 13-year-old sherry cask, and apparently it's an Oloroso sherry butt, and the code is OS5, bottled at 59.2. Now, and distilled in October of 2005. So you would have thought this was this has spent 13 years in an Oloroso cask, but it hasn't in actual fact, because it's actually only spent 5. So it is a finish. It spent its formative years in American oak and then was finished in Oloroso. Why they don't say that on the front label, why they seem to imply that it's wholly sherry matured, I have absolutely no idea. But you know, to me it doesn't matter whether it's been wholly aged in sherry or not. In actual fact, I personally prefer it to be finished, because I know that it's, well, hopefully not going to be a huge stonking sherry monster, but obviously we will find out. And the penultimate bottling is the first of 2 PX finished. Now the 2 PX casks spent a little longer in the cask, 7 years as opposed to 5 years for the Oloroso. Either they weren't quite so active, or somebody just likes extended maturation in Pedro Ximenez casks, I don't know. So the first one we're looking at, let me just check, yes, it is definitely the Tomintoul. It's a 17-year-old, distilled in April of 2001 at 57.4%, and for the PX cask number is PX1. I can't imagine it's the first and only, the first cask that Glencadam ever did from a PX barrel, but there you go. Sometimes I suppose cask numbering systems chop and change, I guess, because the cask number for the Glencadam one is, funnily enough, called PX1 as well. Okay, so this is a 19-year-old. It was distilled in November of 1998. Bottled at 54.2%, and like I said, this has been finished for 7 years in the PX butt, and obviously spent 12 years in ex-American oak. So got a fairly rich colour, so you would probably be quite easily mistaken that for spending its entire life in PX, but well, like I said, we shall see what the notes like. Hopefully the finishing will be a little bit more balanced. It won't be such a huge sherry monster, but you know, playing around with Pedro Ximenez certainly for 7 years, even so, it's still going to give it a lot of Pedro Ximenez character, one would imagine. But anyway, we shall no doubt find out when we get there. So, time to shut up and let's start tasting some whiskey and have water butt. Right, okay, so let's kick off with the Glencadam. Now, as you well know, I am a big fan of Glencadam. It is certainly an A+ distillery as far as I'm concerned, and certainly one of my favourites. And I love young Glencadam. I'm less enamoured, shall we say, by middle-aged Glencadam. I love old Glencadam, the old 21. Oh, absolutely stunning. But anyway, we're not here to dissect that. We're here to dissect the 13-year-old, or the 14-year-old, shall we say. So. Beautiful nose, lots of estery fruit, pineapple, apricot, apple, little bit of sweet cinnamon spice, touch of ginger, little alcohol prickle. I mean, it is bottled at 62% or 62.1%, so not a surprise there. There's a little bit of straw-like barley, a little bit of herbal notes coming through, and the oak is all nicely sat in the background. It's not overwhelming. It's adding some structure. It's adding some vanilla. Oh, it's just beautifully aromatic. I mean, I love young-ish Glencadam. I just love its exuberant fruity character. It's a little tight, but obviously that's because it's at cask strength. And I would imagine it to open up quite well with a little drop of water. But anyway, let's see what the palate's like. Tight, a little tannic, slight spice to start off with, really masked, but the finish is wonderfully juicy. I'm getting the estery fruits, getting the apple, the apricot, pineapple, a little bit of banana, lots of, well, not lots, but a reasonable amount of vanilla, and oh, it's tight. It is really tight, and it's, you know, not a surprise at all. So let's put a little drop of water with that and see if that opens up the nose. Wonderfully aromatic now. Lots of barley has come out. The fruit is maybe not quite so exuberantly juicy as you would expect, but it still has a lovely softness and a lovely estery character. A little bit more spice, touch of milk chocolate possibly, a little bit of cereal, and there's a little bit more slightly grittier American oak tannins. But again, it's got a lovely backdrop of vanilla. It's wonderfly soft. I mean, that is just absolutely stunning. And it is one of the least expensive bottlings at around about £99. I mean, you know, we know single cask bottlings and certainly bottlings at cask strength are not going to come cheap. And by God, that's beautiful. Super pass right now. Oh, the oak has come forward a little bit more creamier to start off with, a little bit more vanillins. The fruit kind of comes in on the mid palate with that lovely juiciness. Oak is bittering a little bit on the finish. There's a little bit of spice as well, but it's certainly nothing to get bent out of shape about. It's all really balanced, and I like a little bit of bitterness just to finish things off, because you know, you don't really just want a sort of a cloyingly sweet mouthful. You want something to just offset that, whether that's some citrus notes or whether it's a little bit of bitterness from the oak. As long as it's all harmonious and in balance, which this absolutely is, then oh, that's gorgeous. Okay, so let's move on to the Glencadam, and this I believe has a price tag of around about £125. So let's see what the nose gives us. You get, there's an obvious, slightly more mature element to the nose, a little bit more dustier oak. The fruit is not quite so juicy, but it is still quite fleshy, with apricot, pineapple, apple, almost a touch of dried fruit. You can certainly sort of sense a little bit of oxidation character developing. The oak is quite bourbony, but not in a bourbony vanilla way. It's got that sort of almost kind of rye-like spiciness, and it is quite, well, raw is not the right word. Intense is not the right word either. Well, what's the word I'm looking for? It's very kind of sort of natural. I guess it's very yeah. You can literally smell the oak tannins. I mean, it's that kind of thing, and it's a lovely nose. It is really very, very impressive. It's certainly not lacking in depth. There's some lovely barley character, and it's just starting to develop at that bit of maturity. And like I said, that little bit of oxidation note is coming in, and it's a really complex nose, it has to be said. See what the pal's like. A little drying on the finish, that's slightly masked, but again, like on the nose, it is showing some obvious maturity. There's a sort of a light oxidized fruit character. There's a little bit of dustiness from the oak. The oak is probably a little bit more creamier than the nose would suggest. There's less tannins. There's a bit of a spicy bite on the finish. Obviously the alcohol is kind of emphasizing the wood spices. There's a bit of barley. There's a bit of banana, almost kind of banana skin note. But again, really complex, lovely depth. I don't know whether it really needs a drop of water, but I mean, we will see what happens when we do that. A lot lighter now. I'm actually getting some citrus notes now. A little bit of tangerine and orange has come out. The oak is a little bit more vanillaed, less of the sort of raw kind of American oak kind of character. It's a lot softer now, but there's still some lovely spice notes. Touch of white licorice, white chocolate. I mean, that again, that is a lovely nose. Absolutely gorgeous. Let's see what the palte's like. That's a lovely finish. Softer, juicier, creamier. Again, all the sort of fleshy fruits are there. I'm not quite getting so much of the oxidised note that I got on the palate when it was neat, but there is a little intonation of dried fruit on the finish. It's not so bitter now, in actual fact. It's got more of a not quite coffee, but sort of in the sort of chocolatey, sort of somewhere between sort of milk chocolate and dark chocolate. It's kind of not got a bitterness, it's got a slight grittiness, a graininess. Oh, I mean, that's a lovely finish. It's a lovely complex whiskey, and certainly I think if you handed over 125 quid for that, you would not be disappointed. Okay, so on to the Tomintoul 13. This is the least expensive bottling in the range at about £81–82. So let's see what nose gives on this one, shall we? Lovely nose. More barley, slightly tighter than the Glencadam. Not quite so exuberantly fruity, but there's certainly pleasant depth of apricot. A little bit more honey, in actual fact. A little bit more cat scratching the arm as well. Yeah. Yeah, well, oh. Alright, go. What's that? Right, so more minerally, slightly tighter, still got some lovely apricot, more barley, slightly straw-like barley as well, touch of herbal notes kind of coming through, and there is a little bit of oxidation as well. I'm getting a little dried fruit note just right at the edges. Again, I mean, that is a lovely nose. Really aromatic, but sort of aromatic and tight at the same time, if you see what I mean. It's a really intriguing nose, really impressive. Let's see what the palate's like. Ooh, that's masked. You can feel the alcohol on the finish. More barley, more honey, slightly tighter, slightly herbalier barley kind of character. It's really interesting, the difference between the two distilleries. It's not as kind of juicy and fruity. It's a lot more, almost kind of a little bit more serious, if you like, I suppose. There's a minerality, a tightness. Not really getting a huge amount on the finish because the alcohol is really masking this. A bit of spice possibly, but it's pretty much all alcohol. So I think this needs a little drop of water, and we shall see what that does to it. Right, let's see what those are like now. Again, that's brought out a lovely citrus note, a touch of tangerine, orange. A little bit of pineapple as well, but again it's still barley focused, a little less honey now. Not really getting a huge amount of oak either. The oak was sort of just about sort of there. And considering this is a first fill bourbon barrel, I would have expected a lot more oak character, and it just goes to show you how how casks can differ entirely, and how they can mature in completely unexpected ways. I mean, you know, there's practically no oak there at all. I mean, you can sense it, and you can sense it giving the structure to the whiskey, but I'm not getting big vanillins. I'm not getting sort of classic sort of bourbony, rye, spicy sort of character. I mean, this is a really good cask, and that's often the problem with first fill bourbon casks, is that they can be just too aggressively bourbony, and you get too much of that character, and you know, it's pretty much the same as sticking it into a first fill or a Rosso, but you know, that they can be so incredibly unbalanced. But anyway, this certainly isn't. Anyway, let's see what the palate like now. Lighter, more citric, lemon. It doesn't quite have the depth of the Glencadam. There's some lovely barley notes. The honey seems to have disappeared. Again, I'm not getting a great deal of oak. It's all very adding structure, but no real vanillins. It's kind of missing a little bit, I think. The finish is a bit sort of, and 80 quid. I would want a little bit more. I think the Glencadam certainly had that in spades, didn't it? Oh, stop scratching me. This is, I loved it when it was neat. I mean, really intense. Putting a little drop of water with it, just, I wouldn't say it's kind of exposed its flaws, because it doesn't really have any, but it's just not quite sort of, not quite there, I think, shall we say. Okay, so let's move on to the Tomintoul 18. A little bit of gap. See what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Now that is a lovely nose. That has got sort of a lot more maturity than you expect for a whisky of 18 years old. It's got light coffee, oxidised fruit, sort of slightly sort of baked apple, minerals. It's almost got a slight sherry richness to it, and it's certainly not one of the sherry casks, I know that, but it's got that kind of feel to it. It is very rich, and the oak is a lot more sort of noticeable than it is on the 13. Slightly sort of straw-like barley notes, malt. You know, this, yeah, it's a stunning nose. It really is. It's one of those noses you keep sticking your nose in, and you keep sort of picking up new aromas, new notes. It is really complex. Has to be said, this is a pretty damn good cask, and it just kind of goes along with my sort of school of thought with Tomintoul, is that it really is one of those malts that's pleasant enough when it's young, when it's you know, sort of 10-ish sort of years old, but it really comes into its own when it starts to get into sort of mid-teens. I mean, certainly the sort of standard 16-year-old is just a real go-to bottling as far as I'm concerned, and still a really good price. And this just goes to show that sort of Tomintoul really comes into its own at that kind of age. Anyway, see what the palate's like. Straw-like, juicy, touch of oxidised fruit, grippy, slightly coffee tannins, touch of vanilla, a little bit of straw, a little bit of minerality, little bit of herbal note, almost kind of heathery. don't really think that actually needs to be diluted. I think that's perfectly fine. I love the sort of the intensity of the spices on the finish. I mean, yes, the alcohol is obviously fueling that. I am going to put a little drop of water with it just to sort of see what happens, but I really don't think it actually needs it. I mean, it is only it's only 54.3 after all. I mean, you know, it's not that alcoholic. More vanilla, softer, possibly a shade less interesting. It's got some lovely sweet barley now though, and yeah, the oak is certainly a lot more noticeable. It's more obvious first fill vanilla character, and I think I certainly would stick with my gut feeling that I would have this without a drop of water. Anyway, let's see what the parts like now. Again, it's rounder, it's softer, there's more vanilla, but it does seem to sort of like tail off the complexity. The spice seems to no longer be there on the finish. It's very soft, it's easygoing, but I think, you know, like I said, I think my gut reaction was sort of pretty much spot on. It doesn't really need a drop of water because it just loses that slight intensity of character. And yeah, at 112 quid, yeah, I think that's pretty good value actually. Nice. Right, time to move on to the sherried casks. This is the Oloroso sherried 13-year-old, like I said at the beginning of the show. A finish which has spent 5 years in the Oloroso. Let's see what those give us. Dear God, that's a monster. That spent 5 years in a sherry cask. Wow, yeah, that picked up a hell of a lot of sherry. I mean, it's burnt raisins, it's treacle, it's not quite tar, but sort of tar-y treacle, walnut, Oloroso herbal notes. Yeah, screaming sherry. I mean, distillery character? No, not a hope. Touch of citrus possibly. I mean, for those of you that love, and I wouldn't quite go as far as saying it's raw Oloroso, but it is very intense, and you know, it's kind of a not mucking about, shall we say. I think the palate's going to be pretty much the same, but let's taste it and find out. I feel that alcohol. Dense, burnt raisins, treacle, dark syrup, raisinated fruit, touch of herbal Oloroso, really clean. No blemishes whatsoever, no sulphur, no off notes, no fust or dirtiness. I mean, it is pristine. But it's all sherry. I mean, it's, you know, there's a touch of walnut, a bit of fig, a bit of, you know, yada yada yada. I wouldn't quite say it's a sort of thing. Light and shade is what it's missing personally, and this is like I said to you when I was tasting the American oak cask. You know, the cask is too much in control, even after finishing. The balance is skewed towards the sherry, and I know there are a lot of you that love sherried whiskies, and you would absolutely kill for this because it is textbook clean Oloroso sherry cask whiskey. For me, as you well know, it's just a little one-dimensional. Anyway, we're going to put a little drop of water with it and see if that makes any difference whatsoever. No is the answer. It's pretty much as it was when it was neat. It's It's big, it's sherry, raisinated fruit, touch of celery stick. Less of the burnt raisins, a bit more treacle possibly, but I mean either way, it's sherry at the end of the day. Let's see what the parts like now. A little lighter, softer, but still really sherried. Not quite so much burnt fruit, more toasted fruit, I suppose. It has kind of taken that sort of slight raw edge off the sherry character, but again, still quite herbal, still very Oloroso-y. Touch more citric, almost mouth-watering finish. I mean, you know, like I said, if you love sherried whiskies, absolutely nothing wrong with that whatsoever. You know, that really will float your boat. Anyway, next one. Right, okay, so we're moving on to the Tomintoul 17-year-old. So this has spent 7 years finishing in a Pedro Ximenez butt, and if you were to want to purchase it, you're looking at somewhere around about 135 quid, which again I suppose is not bad for a it's about par for the course really for a cask strength 17-year-old, it has to be said. Shockingly how whiskey has got expensive these days. But anyway, let's see what the nose goes. Now, it's lighter on the sherry character. It's not quite as winey and pruny and PXy as I would expected. It's got more of a sort of Manzanilla-y sort of character. It's got that lightness to it, although it doesn't quite have the sort of overt green nuts and that kind of character that I tend to get with Manzanillas. And certainly, obviously, there's no real saltiness. Again, another sort of Manzanilla kind of note. It's got some lovely dried fruit. It's got a sort of slight cognac-esque rancio, sultana, raisins, dried apple, touch of coffee, licorice. I mean, again, I think I can get a little distillery character, but I'm not kind of too sure. I think I'm kind of sort of kind of hunting, I suppose. No, I don't think I can. I think that was wishful thinking. Again, this is all about the sherry. It's even got a bit of a kind of, I'm almost getting a bit of sort of floor notes, you know, for those of you that know sherry, sherry tends to develop what they call a floor, which F-L-O-R, not double O, not as in floor, but floor, which is kind of essentially sort of dead yeast cells and stuff like that, which forms a kind of layer on the top of the sherry, which is one thing that sort of helps stopping the sort of the oxidation, and I can almost smell that. I often get that in sort of real raw kind of Oloroso sherries. So I mean, as a kind of an example of sort of raw sherry cask influence, yeah, can't fault it. See what the parts like. Soft, treacly, winey, classically PX, really quite sweet. Alcohol is obviously just stopping it becoming sort of too blousy and too sweet. Bit of walnut, raisinated fruit, sultana, moist dates. I mean, it is a juicy PX monster of a palate, it has to be said. And I think at cask strength, it's like I said, it's stopping it becoming sort of too sweet and too PXy. So I'm going to put a little drop of water with it. I mean, again, I think if I was to sort of want to drink this, I would probably elect to drink it without water, purely because I think the alcohol is just stopping it becoming really overly sweet. Notice a little lighter now, a little nuttier possibly. Still as a dried fruit, it's still quite sherried. I mean, sherry is just not going to magically disappear with a drop of water. There's a touch of vanilla possibly, but again, it's very much the same as it was when it was neat. Anyway, see what the parts like now. Softer, sweeter as I expected. Reducing the alcohol has kind of left the sweetness of the sherry to kind of, like, I wouldn't quite say rampage on the palate, but it's certainly a lot more noticeable. It's a little simpler, it's a bit more homogeneous. There wasn't a great deal of light and shade to start off with, but there's even less now. You put water with it, and again, it's very clean, it's very sherried, it's just like no distillery character. It's kind of, you know, 135 quid, and I got that. No, £135 quality, yeah, got that, absolutely spot on. You know, this is the sort of quality of whiskey you would expect if you're going to pay that sort of money, but it's just not got enough complexity for me. I'm not getting any distillery character, I'm not getting any balance. All I'm getting is sherry, and like I said, you know, it's each to his own. Some of you may well go, oh my god, I really got to have that, you know, and yeah, brilliant, you know, it's a real quality whiskey, and if that is your cup of tea, then get yourself a bottle. And finally, it's the Glencadam 19-year-old. Again, like I said, finished for 7 years in Pedro Ximénez cask. Let's see what nose gives us on this end. Now that is more classically Pedro Ximénez. It's big, it's winey, dried grape, sweet treacle, tobacco, milk chocolate, or milky sort of darky chocolate. I mean, if you could find distillery character in that, then you're a better man than me, because I get absolutely nothing. I get no sort of juicy, gorgeous, estery fruit. All I get is just big thumping sherry, and you sort of go, what is the point? And yeah, there's a nice kind of chocolate coated raisin note, and yeah, and every now and again you sort of think, yeah, I like a nice sherried whiskey as an after dinner whiskey as opposed to maybe a cognac, and yeah, why not? I mean, I'm exactly the same. Every now and again I do fancy a bit of sherry. Shock. But you know, in the grand scheme of things, these are just sort of like really not that sort of interesting as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, let's see what Pat's like. Big, sweet, winey, pruny, treacly, nice citric note kind of coming through to sort of balance. And again, I don't think it really needs the water. I think the sort of that kind of alcohol and slight citric note is just kind of really balancing the sweetness. It's kind of treading a fine line between the two, and just about sort of working in tandem, I think. It's got some pleasant maturity. It's got a touch of a walnut shell, but again, like I said, some nice spices. My tongue is tingling quite nicely, it has to be said. But again, it's sherry or PX sherry. Anyway, we're going to put a little drop of water with it and see if that does anything. By the way, this is £145 if you were thinking of purchasing a bottle. Again, it's sherry, it's winey. It's maybe a little floral now, it has to be said. A little less treacly. There's a little bit more nuttiness. And it's a little bit more pure dried grape notes. I mean, again, it's a fabulously clean sherry cask, but that's all it really is. Anyway, let's see what it tastes like. A little lighter, still quite winey, touch of vanilla, still very sherry. There's a little bit of coffee now kind of coming through on the finish. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show up. Firstly, a big thank you to Angus Dundee Distillers for the samples. Appreciate the support. I mean, yes, I know we do business together, and at the end of the day, sort of that's the main point of being in business, I suppose, is to sell stuff. But obviously, if you can't sell stuff, reviewing, social media kind of stuff, advertising is always very beneficial, and plenty of distilleries are quite aware of that fact, and like I said, I just really appreciate the continued support. Looking at today's whiskies, all of them quality wise, you just you cannot fault. To me, the star of the show was the Glencadam 14-year-old. I know that it's such a beautiful whiskey. I mean, estery, fruity, loads of character, really balanced oak, just absolutely gorgeous. The 18-year-old, I mean, yeah, again, a really very good whiskey, but to me didn't quite have the appeal of its younger bottling. I mean, yes, very good, but just kind of gravitate towards slightly younger Glencadam. The Tomintoul 13, it's kind of like the opposite way around. Again, I thought that a very good bottling, it has to be said, but it just didn't quite have what the 18-year-old had. I mean, I know that's a bit of an obvious thing to say. It's 5 years older. You'd expect it to be slightly more complex, but it just, as I said when I was tasting it, I really feel that Tomintoul kind of comes into its own around about its mid-teens. Yes, there's been some very impressive older bottlings of Tomintoul, but distillery rise, I just think 16, 18, that kind of sort of age is really the à point, as they would say in wine circles. It's just absolutely spot on. The sherry bottlings, well, positives. The 15-year-old or the 13-year-old sherry Oloroso bottling, very clean, no blemishes, as you would expect. You would not expect a distillery of the producer, the quality whiskey that Tomintoul does, to release something that's rank and sulphured, but it's the nature of the beast at the end of the day. I just found it sort of too heavy, no distillery character. Even though it was a finish, it just really didn't float my boat. And the same for the PX finish. Again, very clean, very impressive. If you like that type of whiskey, then you're going to love that. But for me, didn't really have the interest that the 18 single American oak cask had at all. And the same goes for the Glencadam PX. Again, the PX was too heavy, it was too dominating. Personally, I wouldn't have aged it or finished it for quite as long. You know, I think with PX casks being very, very intense, very sweet, very grapey, very obvious, I think, you know, being a little bit more judicious with a finishing time would have, for me personally, been better. But obviously they are what they are, and you know, there are going to be people that kind of love them. I mean, you know, if I ran a distillery, then everything would be filled into American oak, or maybe I'd play around with a few things. You know, I'd play around with some Swedish oak, things like that. But you know, it's just sort of like, you know, at the end of the day, I keep going on about it. What I think is the most important characteristic of a whiskey is balance, whether it's balance between distillery character and oak, or things like honey and citrus, that kind of thing. It's all about the harmony of balance, and sometimes to me the balance is absolutely spot on, as in the Glencadam 14-year-old, or to a certain extent the Tomintoul 18. Sometimes the balance is skewed one way or t'other, and it's just the way these things are. But anyway, anyway, so all that's left to say is don't forget that this month's tasting in the shop is a John Paul tasting. Shilton will be with us, and we'll be going through the what makes Paul John's click. So until next week, all that's left to say is good afternoon and good dramming.